y'all, it's Bethany from Bethany Brings Books. I am super excited to be back today. So I started my channel and then just a few days later I actually left to go on vacation to Florida, and we've been gone for 10 days. So I came back last week and I've been super busy ever since, trying to just get settled back in. Anyway, I've been really excited about doing some new videos. So there's a few different videos I would like to do. I was able to go to a Goodwill bookstore while I was in Florida, which was really cool, and I would love to do a book haul. Today I want to do my May wrap up, talk about the books that I read in May. So I'm really excited to get started. Here we go. And I'm sorry if there's any weird angles or anything in this video. I am trying to film with my front facing camera, and plus the air conditioning is probably loud. It's right above the camera. We're trying this out and we'll see how it goes. I participated in 2 readathons last month. The first readathon was the Christian Fiction Readathon that Katie over at Paperbacks and Ponytails hosted. I had picked 3 books for that challenge and I read 2 of them. I'm still reading the 3rd one. The first book that I picked was Bookshop by the Sea, and this is by Denise Hunter. I used this for the prompt to read a book with flowers on the cover. There's some flowers right here on the cover. So I used it for that and also for a romance. And so this was good. It was the 3rd Denise Hunter that I read in a row. I caught up on another of her series. This is a standalone, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, I think, on Goodreads. She has another beach read called Summer by the Tides that I actually think I like a little bit better. We follow a young lady named Sophie who returns to her beach town that her family vacationed at while she was growing up to set up a bookshop. And in the process of all that, she's involved in her sister's wedding, and she comes into contact with her high school boyfriend. When they were in high school, there were some issues and they kind of parted ways on a bad note. And so all these years later, she still has anger towards him, and they both walk through those issues together and try to resolve what happened with him. He decides to stick around and help her with her remodeling and fixing up her bookstore, getting it ready to be open, because she has to be open like in a week's time. And in that process, they kind of reconnect. They realize very quickly that they are still attracted to each other and they still have feelings for each other. And so we see them walking through that process and trying to decide, could they make this work? They live a long distance from each other. Both of them have some childhood home issues, and all of that affects them now. She kind of had issues with being, because her mother died when she was younger, so she kind of had issues with trying to be the mom to her siblings, and then he was always afraid of getting close to people because of some of his abandonment issues. And all of that I thought was pretty well written. It's a really good, light, easy beach read. Very quick read, and I really enjoyed it. There were similarities in this story to her book Summer by the Tides. There are times I do feel like she can use some of the same plot lines sometimes. Overall, she manages to add some twists that I didn't see coming. And another cool thing about this book that I thought was fun is she has a series previous to this called Bluebell Inn Romance series, I think, is something like that. That series is around a inn that these siblings own, and in the very first book, a writer comes to stay at the inn. The innkeeper doesn't know he's a writer or an author to start with, because he writes under a pseudonym. They kind of develop feelings for one another and they have their own story. But what's cool is in this book, as she's opening up the bookshop, she is trying to open it up by a certain date, because that author is going to come through town on his book tour, and she is going to host him at her bookshop, which is a really big deal. So I thought that was so cute, cool, like a fun little nugget from her other series. I love it when authors do that. That's really fun to me. The next book that I read for the Christian Fiction Readathon was Drawing Fire. by Janice Van Tor, and it is the first book in Cold Case Justice series. I had talked about in my last video that I was thinking about DNFing it, but I really wanted to just go ahead and read it so I could get a feel for this author. And I kind of thought I knew how this story was going, but now I'm kind of like, I don't know, because I thought it was going to be like all wrapped up by the end of the book, but it wasn't. So we follow this detective named Abby Hart, who the book starts off with her hunting down a serial killer who's killing elderly women. And I actually thought that was going to be the story of the book, but that is all resolved really quickly in the first few chapters. And really it was just the basis to build the story, because one of the women is related to a politician that the detective has been trying to get in contact with for years. So that was really just kind of a background storyline to build the rest of the story. So the detective has been wanting to meet this politician for years because he was friends with her parents, and they actually owned a restaurant together years ago before he was even a politician. When she was 6 years old, their restaurant that they all owned together burned down. Her parents were murdered inside. So she grew up, wanting to grow up and be a police officer and investigate this and figure out what happened to her parents. There was never any closure to the case. Anyway, we follow her as she comes in contact with this private investigator who is doing his own investigation into a runaway girl, and they come in contact, and then they end up realizing that they are connected with her parents' case. They both have connections to the case, and so they begin to look into it together, and we just kind of follow that. We follow some different things that develop, but the story this is actually a series, and so we don't get total closure at the end of this story. We see a few things that happen, some twists and some turns that I was not expecting, and we are kind of left hanging about what happens next. I do plan to continue the series because I do want to see what happens next. I gave this 3 stars on Goodreads because I wasn't like super intrigued with the whole story. It wasn't really very suspenseful, honestly. It was very procedural. She did a superb job of procedural details, the details relating to like the job and those aspects. I felt it was, because this author is actually a former police officer, so I felt like all of that was really detailed and very accurate. But like I said, the writing just really didn't draw me in. It wasn't like, it didn't just grab me, I guess. I am interested enough to continue the series because I want to see what happens next, but it's not like high on my priority list. Like I really want to go read this right now, but I would continue to read the series. I read this for the prompt mystery, for the mystery prompt, and a new to me author, because I had not read anything by her so far. So the third prompt the third book that I chose was a book that had been on my backlist for 6 months or longer, and so I chose The Beautiful Ashes of Gomez Gomez. I'm currently reading that. I'll talk more about that one once I finish it. I am finding that one interesting, and that's a series as well that I am definitely interested in reading the rest of. But anyway, the book that I'm super excited to talk about, I'm like so excited about this. It was 5 stars, and it's probably going to be one of my top books of the year. That is Written on the Wind. This is by Elizabeth Camden, and this book, y'all, is so good. Oh my goodness. This book follows Natalie Blackstone, who she has grown up it's like around the turn of the century, 1900. She grew up in her father's banking business. The Blackstone family is like banking royalty, I guess, in New York in the early 1900s, and they're billionaires. She was an only child growing up, and her father would take her to the bank with him and basically kind of let her watch and eventually let her have some roles in the bank since he didn't have a son to carry on his legacy. It was something that he kind of tried to keep hidden because it was very frowned upon for women to be involved in anything like that. And if it got out that he was letting her handle certain stuff, then it would be considered risky, and if something went wrong, it would just look really bad for his bank. This was just the time period that it was in. So anyway, Natalie has been very heavily involved in the financing of the Trans-Siberian Railway in Russia. She was kind of like her thing, that he let her really take the reins of that project. And so during this time, she's been telegraphing, exchanging telegrams. I couldn't think of what to say. She's been exchanging telegrams with a man in Russia who is a count. This count has been posted out in the wilds of like Siberia to kind of follow the progress of the Trans-Siberian Railroad as it's being built. The book opens up with him being suddenly stripped of his title as a count and being condemned to a penal colony because he had did some things that angered some of the people in the government there. He had witnessed some very atrocious things during his time there. Some things done to some of the people near where he was stationed by the Russian military, I think. And so he was very upset about it, and basically was trying to like bring attention to it, and because of that, and because he refused to obey orders to participate in these activities, he was condemned to a penal colony. As he's on his way to this penal colony, he decides he is going to try to escape and get to America to reach Natalie. He has a certain percentage of shares in this bank, and if he can get there, he'll have the funds that he needs to survive, and also the means to be able to tell his story and bring awareness to what he saw happen and hopefully prevent it from happening again. So we see him begin this trick as he tries to escape, and he travels across Russia to get to America. And he arrives in America and he meets Natalie for the first time, and we just kind of follow their journey as she finds out what he wants to do. They're at odds about how to go about this whole thing, because he kind of wants to bring the Trans-Siberian Railway to a halt, stop funds to it. And she's like, you can't do that. They're at odds about the whole situation because he is wanting to go about things in a way that she knows will hurt her family's name, hurt the bank, and she knows her father is not going to allow him to go about things in the way that he's trying to. What I love about this book is just, first of all, Count Sokolov, I think is how you say his name, I don't know. He is just an absolutely unique character. I've never read another character like him. He's Russian and very emotional, he acts upon his emotions often. He is all things moody, and death is honor, and she's like all hopeful, and just two polar opposites. He's just such a unique character, just very flamboyant and emotional, but at the same time very compelling. He loves his fine suits and to live in luxury and have his manicures and be involved in like all the luxuries of the upper class, but at the same time he also is very compassionate and has a willingness and a heart to help the people that he saw suffer. In all of this, him and Natalie continue like their journey. They're getting to know each other, they're falling in love, but he longs to go back to Russia. He's longing for his family's homeland and for his estate in Russia. She doesn't think she could ever leave the banking industry. She loves her career and her position there. She knows as a woman she would never be able to get a position in a bank anywhere else in the world. I love you. She's been given this opportunity solely because she is the daughter of a Blackstone. There's so many different turns to the story, and just Elizabeth Camden, she writes so much detail in her books, so many unique historical facts and tidbits. They're so fascinating and so unique, and I love reading her stories. It was interesting, like, seeing insight into Russian culture, as he talks about and gives descriptions of his family's estate. It's interesting because, you know, I always think of Russia as very cold and wintry, but just the descriptions that he gives of it when it's not wintertime, it sounds so beautiful. And so I actually was like researching Russia and Russia farmland and stuff. And then we also are following Natalie as she is getting involved in music. One of the side stories is the development of recorded music, as she's become interested in that. And so we learned a little bit about that and how music began to be recorded in the early 1900s. Just all of that. Count Sokolov made the book for me. He was such a fascinating character. He could be gloomy and despairing, but then he could be passionate and fiery, and their romantic attraction to each other. It was so interesting, and just watching their conversations, and I don't know, this book, it was so good. It was so good. I love reading books that give me insight into other cultures and American history and world history and just things that I didn't know, and tell it to me in a way that fascinates me, and it's in a story, and so it's really interesting. And she uses all these real characters and she includes them as side characters, and it's just Elizabeth Camden, she's one of my favorites. I love her books. So there's my fangirling. Oh, one more book. I read four books. I forgot to say that at the start of the video, but I read 4 books and a bunch of short stories. So the 4th book I read this month, and I read it in April and May, but I finished it this month, and that was The Secret Garden. Isn't this copy so pretty? It's by Paper Mill Press. So I have a list of 6 classics that I want to read this year, and I am not doing the greatest. This is the first one I've read, but I've been wanting to read this one for a while now. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. It was just such a beautifully written book. If you love spring and outdoors and growth and gardening and all of those things, this book is just so sweet. Hey y'all, so I hop back on here and do some things. Earlier I didn't realize until I finished talking that my video, it didn't get my last part where I was talking about the Secret Garden and also the short stories that I read. I didn't have time to finish filming. My in-laws came over tonight and brought a gift for the children, and so we ate and did stuff with them. And so anyway, I didn't have a chance to finish filming that, so I wanted to hop back on here and finish talking about that. The Secret Garden, we follow a little girl who is staying in India, and her parents die, so she's sent to live with her uncle who lives in England on a moor. He lives in a huge house. It's very like gloomy and grouchy, and everyone is scared of him. There are lots of gardens there, and she hears a story about one of the gardens that has been locked away for 10 years since her uncle's wife died, because it was her garden, and so he locked it away after she died and hid the key. And so she becomes interested in finding out more about the garden, and she just begins to bloom. As before, she was a grouchy, rude, really just unloved child. She was left to herself and unloved, and she gets out in nature and she makes a friend, and it's a really good story about just growth and springtime and nature, and it's beautiful. I love it. It's a perfect springtime read. I don't know, if you love gardening and nature and plants like I do, I really enjoyed reading it. You feel the thrill along with little Mary Lennox as she sees the new growth and she sees her efforts coming to life while she's gardening. Anyway, it was a fun read, classic read. I loved it, and I would definitely read it again. Also, I forgot when I was talking about Written on the Wind, there was a little tab where he said a quote in it, and that really stuck out to me, and so I tapped it, and I wanted to read it. Count Sokolov is having a conversation with Natalie's cousin, I think. Yeah, Natalie's cousin. He says this quote right here. Sometimes our best memories are born during our harshest trials, he said. They become happy only in hindsight. He's talking about like his time in Siberia. Her cousin said that she thought when he was stationed there that he was lonely and miserable. And he's like reminiscing about all of his times of conversations and telegrams between him and Natalie. And so he says that like sometimes our best memories are born during our harshest trials. They become happy only in hindsight. And that just really stuck out to me because I get what he means. Like, there's times in my life that I hated when I was going through them. But looking back, they have some of the, they have good memories. And even things that, like, I remember the first house that me and my husband stayed in. We were renting when we got married. And it was like this old cinder block house. And it needed work done, and so there was like so many areas that mice could get in and things. And I remember I was like so ready to just get our own place where we could fix it up and not worry about mice and all these things. And now I look back on that time together early in our marriage and have such good memories. Like, I think of it so fondly. That's something so simple, but I see so much truth in that statement. Times that we're placed in really hard circumstances, sometimes some of our best memories come out of those times. And so I really like that quote. The short story readathon. So this was my sheet. I had one more space for nature that I was gonna do the last short story that I read. I'm pretty sure I don't think I read any more other than this one for nature. So it's called A Star for a Warrior, I think. It was a mystery short story that came out of this book. This is short story, like mystery short stories that are from like North Carolinian authors or whatever. And so there's a short story in here by Manly Wade Wellman, and it was written in the 1940s, I believe. It's called A Star for a Warrior. It's definitely one of the longer ones I've read, and one of the more interesting ones. We follow a Native American on a tribal reservation, and he has recently earned his place on the police force. His chief, which is like, I think maybe his grandfather, calls him in and tells him he wants him to go out and to talk to a young lady who has been seen wandering around their reservation asking questions about their ancient tribal songs. There's 3 young men that the tribal songs have been passed down to, and they're the ones who know them, and they're like secret and considered sacred. And so she's trying to convince them to share them with her, I think, for like cultural research reasons, maybe like a project or something. I can't remember the exact reason. So the detective is told, like, go out and talk to her and tell her she needs to, like, basically move along. And so when he goes out, he gets on his horse and he goes out into the desert. And this is like based in the 1940s. He goes out into the desert and he finds her deceased. And so he automatically pretty much assumes that the 3 young men who were camping nearby had something to do with her death. And so he goes to their camp and begins to like talk to each one and kind of interview them, and basically comes to the conclusion that one of them harmed her and killed her, and that like they all know that one of them did it, but they don't know which one did it. They just know one of them did it, and they're not gonna disclose who it is. Like, they're gonna all cover for each other, even though they don't know who did it. He tells them that like he's going to figure out who did it, and he's going to take that one back to jail with him. We just kind of follow that little process of him just kind of figuring out who did it and interrogating each one, but then like just putting the pieces together. And so it was a good short story. I enjoyed it. I think it won an award in 1946. I read, all in all, I think 8 short stories, I believe. And I really enjoyed this short story readathon. I really hope that they host it again next year, because I had so much fun participating. It was like, it just opened me up to more literature and just some older stories that, I mean, I have a lot of short stories and a lot of like classic literature stuff that I just haven't picked up. And so this really pushed me out there to go ahead and pick up some of those older stories and go give those short stories a try. And so I really enjoyed it. So anyway, I think that's everything that I wanted to add on here. Thank y'all guys for watching, and I'm so excited to be back. I'm really having fun interacting with all of y'all, and I look forward to my next video. Hope y'all guys enjoy this video, and I really had a lot of fun talking about what I read in May, and I look forward to seeing you next time.